everybody, Dr. Joan Ifland here. Today I am going to give you some insight into the ultra processed label and why we cannot use it. It's being bandied about in the papers, and ultra processed food addiction is being bandied about, and it's not an okay label for anything related to processed food addiction. And I'm going to show you why right now. So hang in there. So, yes, okay, great. We need a system to help people distinguish foods that are going to kill you from foods that are going to nourish you. Great, yes, we do need that. The people who created the NOVA food classification system, that's what they were trying to do. They just made some big, colossal errors because they don't understand processed food addiction. So they said they looked at all their data and they said, oh, it's the ultra processed foods that are causing the disease. And they made a big mistake. They made a big omission, which they said, no, it's not the sugars and flours and dairy that you use at home. It's not that if you make bread at home or if you make preserves or drinks or desserts at home, that's okay. That is a colossal error. And for somebody who's craving and addicted, it would be an open invitation to disaster. Because the addiction will say, well, let's just go home and make it. And then you're as sick as ever. So we do have evidence that these are quote unquote high glycemic foods, and they do trigger addictive reactions in the brain. So these reactions can be intense cravings that lead to loss of control over food. And when you're eating them chronically, which Americans are, we eat 73% of food in processed foods, then you get disease consequences. So you got to go back to the drawing board on this. Creating categories for addictive foods would then be valuable, because it would help people stop addictive use, and it would stop the addictive loss of control over foods, and it would widen use of addiction recovery protocols, which means that people could actually accomplish getting control over their food. So this is the problem. When you start talking about ultra processed food addiction, you are also saying that you could use sugar and flour and dairy at home. And that is absolutely, blatantly, ridiculously not true. It's a huge omission. Now, I will have to say, in defense of the people who developed the NOVA system, they never intended for it to be used in addiction arenas. So now you have people who are trying to use that category in addiction work, and they're trying to say, oh, it's ultra processed food addiction. That is just not true. It's not helpful. So what we're showing here is that sugars are shown to be addictive, and it doesn't make any difference whether you're using them at home or elsewhere or anywhere. Sugars are addictive, and high fructose corn syrup goes through the system like corn alcohol. So you've got the equivalent, or the functional equivalent of corn alcohol, being added to foods. Now that is clearly a problem. But flour is a high glycemic food, and that has also been associated with addictive eating. So this is why you can't just get off of sugar, because then you'll start using flour products the same way you were using sugar. So here is the key point. We know from research that exposure to food cues does translate into what's called enhanced eating behavior, so cravings and overeating. So particularly the smell of food hyperactivates cravings, hyperactivates the reward system. So if you have the smell of sugar and flour in your house, this is triggering overeating. And it's not childhood issues, and it's not because you're lazy or you're self-sabotaging or any of those things. It is the smell of food being cooked in your home that is causing a flood of cravings in your brain. So, and here's a very particular study: the smell of bread is associated with food seeking. Now, the fact that this is all taking place at home, if you agree, like if your addicted brain says, oh, well, I could make sugar and flour products at home. Now, according to the NOVA classification system, that would work. I'm allowed to do that. Then you are turning your home into what's called a place trigger, which means that when you go home, you walk into your home, you are triggered into thinking about making sugar and flour products because you've made them at home. So there's the association. And that's deadly. That's deadly. Your home should be a place where you can go and think about recovery. Your home should be a place that triggers, I am calm in all situations. I have control of my food. That should be what's going on at home. But if you make these products and consume them at home, then boom, that safety is gone. And your home now becomes a cravings trigger. This, we think, got worse during COVID because people were at home and they were eating processed foods. And we now have research showing that cravings were already, even before COVID, cravings were already more intense in the dining room, kitchen, and bedroom than elsewhere. So the home was already a trigger. And because of COVID, it became worse. This big fancy word, salience, it just means the ability of a trigger to create loss of control. You know, how vibrant, how vigorous, how vivid is that trigger? Does it really cause loss of control? And what this research is showing is that during COVID, because people were using processed foods at home, the ability of the home then to trigger loss of control over food became worse. And now you have the system where it says, oh, you can make this at home. It just makes my stomach hurt. It's so wrong. It's so damaging. It's so dangerous. There's another bit of research showing that the closer a food is to you, the more likely you are to eat it. So keeping the ingredients for sugar and flour for desserts at home, meaning that they're very close by, is just by proximity creating triggers and cravings. So I do want to go back and defend the NOVA team that they never in any of their discussions of what NOVA is good for, they never say that it should be applied to food addiction. They never say, oh yes, ultra processed food addiction, that's a valid concept. They never claim that. Other people coming in from the outside have decided to call the processed food addiction ultra processed food addiction, and that's just an enormous, enormous mistake. We know that what we have been given by the tobacco food industry, when tobacco came in and bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods in the mid 1980s, they brought their addiction business model with them. They got 2/3 of Americans to smoke using that addiction business model. I mean, cigarettes are disgusting. So the addiction business model is really, it's a very tightly crafted, well-honed business model to get people to use a destructive product if it has craving properties, if it will activate the craving pathways in the brain. So what we're now all working on is recovering from a substance use disorder. And in a substance use disorder model, it doesn't make any difference where you're using the substance. It is going to activate those cravings and loss of control. And that's the bottom line. So here are some do's and don'ts for you. Do. Only make clean foods at home, and then your home will be a trigger to want clean foods there. So do turn your home into a trigger for wanting unprocessed foods. And do remember that sugar, flour, dairy are addictive no matter where they are consumed. Now, do remember that ultra processed foods are just one category of harmful addictive foods. The other categories, the sugar, flour, dairy, are also addictive. And the sugar, using sugar at home is particularly awful, the idea, because sugar has been shown to be more addictive than cocaine in a couple of different kinds of studies. Here are your don'ts. Don't turn your home into a cravings trigger. Don't believe that making desserts at home is safer than buying them. Now if you make them at home, the smell is in the air and the ingredients are in the home. And now you've got this association with home. Just, it's not safer than buying a dessert in the store. Don't make processed foods for other people in your home. Don't store processed foods in your home. Don't have the smell of processed foods in your home. And don't consume those addictive foods at home. Now, here's your bibliography. You guys know I only work from research. This is how I decide how to present issues or whether something is an issue is I read the research. So here are all the studies that I used in this little presentation, and you can see that what I'm talking about is very much backed up by research. So thank you very much for being with me today. I appreciate you. Please tell everybody that the ultra processed food addiction label is not appropriate for us. It doesn't work for us, and just ignore it. Thank you. I care about you, and I want you to be well. I hope I hear from you. This is such a joy to get out from under the burden of diet related diseases. It's great to be in the sunlight of the truth as we know it from research. And it's great to take your health into your own hands. So let me hear from you. I appreciate you. Take care.